Very much. Hi, everyone. So welcome to yet another roundtable. Very interesting discussions seem to unravel in these sessions every sort of couple of months. And today we've got Heike with us, who's a business owner of creative media, but actually there's another side to what he does, his work. So Heike, over to you. Why don't you introduce yourself to us and what you do?
Yes. Good morning, everyone. It's nice to meet you all. If I did meet you already at one of the network events of Seven Oaks. Yes, it's correct. I run VA Creative Media, but I run also a secondary company I just recently set up. That is a good consulting company. And that specializes in inclusion. And I focus mostly on neurodiversity. Within the team, we have a look at how we can improve communication, but also how you can create more awareness within the team about neurodiversity. This can be hiring team members, but also for clients, guests, and like how better to communicate with them and how better to treat them. Myself, just as a backstory, I'm myself neurodivergent also. I have autism, I have ADHD, and I have dyslexia. So all the information that I give also from you is from my own experiences, what I went through in all the years, why I'm asked and like this. That's in short. That's why I specialize in with that company.
Thanks, Heike. So we got talking at the previous networking event.
Yeah.
And one of the things that Heike mentioned to me, which I had no idea about, he said 70% of individuals who suffer from ADHD slash autistic spectrum disorder remain unemployed within the country. And I came across a really interesting sort of case law. And again, with case laws, this is why it would be interesting for our solicitors to sort of jump in here. I've come across two case laws with quite diverse sort of outcomes. And I realize that would depend a lot on where we are with the ADHD spectrum or the autistic spectrum. But I'm going to pop the question in the chat window. I'll give you a minute or so to just take the question in, and then we can just open out, the room to discussions. So for the benefit of our members who might be listening to this video, I'm just going to read the question out. The question says, so initially it's a case law. So ADHD has been accepted as a disability in some cases, although on the facts in JC versus Gordonston Schools Limited, a case law from 2016, the Court of Session declined to accept that its effect was sufficiently substantial and long-term. So given this background, the question is, what default measures should an organization have for cases of ADHD and or autistic spectrum in specific when it comes to recruitment practices and ongoing reasonable adjustments for an employee within the workplace? And just for the sake of this discussion, let's assume there is already an occupational health report in place, which is easily acquired for an existing employee. But as a starting point, what is the advice? Would we recommend for ADHD autism to be treated as a disability under the under legal terms as a default, or option two, do we not treat it as a disability until occupational health were to confirm the same eventually? Where do we start is the question, given these rulings?
I mean, I'd be kind of minded to suggest that it is treated as a disability from the outset. And if the employer is aware that there are kind of reasonable adjustments that we need to be put in place, it mitigates the risk of any kind of future litigation, because yes, whilst the court could determine it either way, if the employer hasn't treated the particular employee fairly, it just opens them up to the risk of litigation. So I'd be minded to say option one.
But actually, I did think about that option. On the other hand, what came up for me, again, in my line of work, is that where you have an individual whose condition is not covered under the Disability under the Equality Act, you end up setting a precedent and you're making adjustments of somebody for whom it's not required at all. And suddenly you have another individual being up in arms and saying, well, why can't, it's ultimately down to occupational health and for a tribunal to decide, but we end up on that really dangerous patch whereby we've made adjustments for somebody whose situation is not covered under the Disability Act, under the Equality Act. And there's somebody else who suffers from migraines every now and then who's arguing that it should be.
Yeah,
so
I mean,
this was the difficulty I came across.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, it's kind of it would be it's down to the employer essentially to kind of assess that. I mean, if the employee is saying that they suffer from this long-term condition that has an adverse effect on their ability to carry out their day-to-day activities, then I think the employer, that's when the obligation passes over to the employer for them to make those reasonable adjustments that the employee requires. Yes, it could set a precedent, but equally, if you've got somebody who suffers with migraines, it's not a kind of one size fits all when it comes to determining whether something qualifies as a disability. It would essentially, if you do end up in the tribunal, it would come down to kind of impact statements and assessing at that point if it does qualify, if the employer is disputing that the employee qualifies as having a disability under the Equality Act.
So that's with respect to an employee. How do we juggle that with even like a candidate who's coming to the door for an interview? Which gets even trickier because we don't have an occupational health report on hand. We have very little information or conversation with that employee. Yes, you can get some forms filled out before they come in for the interview. But which side of that line are you going to put them? Are you going to treat them as disabled by default, or are you going to have a discussion? Where do you start with recruitment?
Mm-hmm. Does anyone want to take that one?
I think it comes to, how do you know if they've got ADHD diagnosis there, or any kind of on the autism spectrum, that kind of information isn't necessarily going to be presented to you prior to, when you're making arrangements for an interview. I think the best way to deal with that potential is to say, please let us know if you require any adjustments, or if there's anything that we need to consider throughout the process to enable you to, give us your best performance, as it were, during the selection process, or something like that. Probably not that wording exactly, but you know what I mean. Because then they've got an opportunity to say, well, I've got ADHD, so it'd be really helpful if X, Y, and Z, and then it can just be taken on a case-by-case basis, because you can't just blanket say, everybody with, a diagnosis of ADHD is going to be exactly the same. They're all going to be different, aren't they? So you can't you're not a doctor, so you can't make any assumptions, but if you ask the question, and it provides an opportunity for the candidates to indicate what may be useful. Those are my thoughts anyway.
Thanks, Rose. Chris, any sort of input from you, or Gillian? I mean,
yes, very early in the day, isn't it, to ask such difficult questions. I'm
so sorry.
mulling it over. I would draw a distinction between an employee who's working for an organization and presents with a condition and the sort of neurodiverse challenges you would see possibly in an interview and a selection process, because of course some candidates won't tell you up front, and they're entitled not to, and that's a difficult line to walk as an employer. If you suspect somebody, for example, may not be making a great deal of eye contact or engaging, that shouldn't necessarily be seen as a sign of disinterest. Those sorts of soft skills need to be sort of reevaluated. But if you suspect but don't know, it's very difficult to push. And Heike, I suspect you have a view on that, and you would be able to tell us. And I think perhaps the position is different in the situation you're propositioning in terms of the two options, as to whether you treat somebody with a disability or without a disability. I suspect I'd go straight down the middle, in the sense that I think it's always fact specific. I think it turns on the medical evidence and best information. If in doubt, you go off and you get the best report you possibly can, so that you're approaching things in a very measured and deliberate way, because it may or may not fall into the protected characteristic zone. I'd be less concerned primarily about setting a precedent, because it's probably going to be, for example, different to a migraine periodically, because this is something that's likely to affect somebody, very much more frequently than that. But I think knowledge is key in approaching that, and I would take it in a step-by-step basis. But I'm sure others have views as well. I think it is always right, as Faye says, I would be risk averse is the way I would approach it. I think you have to be quite bold to say, oh, I'll take a view on that, and I'll take a view that it's not sufficiently substantial and long term, and actually therefore I'm going to be fairly blunt in the way I'm going to approach things. I think that's risky. Yeah, personally.
Genevieve?
Well, yeah, I mean, I agree with everything that Chris has said, but also
Suck up.
I suppose that it does also depend on the role, and it does depend a bit on the role that the person's going to take. It's just like anything, you evaluate whether the person is suited to their role. So you somehow have to bring that into the context in the right way. That's all I can add.
Can everyone hear me, or have I frozen?
Yeah.
You can hear me. Okay, my screen's frozen, but I'll just keep talking. The one thing that I came across, speaking of the role, is that we were recruiting for a care sector, and this was interesting because this individual applied for a role as a chef or an assistant chef in the kitchen, and some excellent skills out there. And this individual didn't in the application form outline autistic spectrum or ADHD at all. But thankfully, there is another stage in the recruitment process where we make a conditional offer, and there are some medical checks that need to be done at that stage. And that's when it came out. And with occupational health assistance, we could then put measures in place and adjustments in place for this individual to continue working. And we offer the role, firstly, and the work in the kitchen. But you're right, I think with Genevieve's sort of point, it really so much depends on the role and what we are able to do, which stage we are able to get occupational health advice. Could everyone hear me? Because my screen's completely frozen.
Yes.
I can hear you.
Yeah, we can hear you.
So any sort of, Heike, do you have any inputs at all on that?
Yeah, I do. Not
Go ahead.
surprisingly. I think especially coming just to the point of that, getting candidates to tell them about that they have neurodiversity is going to be a hard sell, because I marked for 30 years and I never thought in interviews that because I had dyslexia on the early age, big diagnosis, I never thought that. Because the thing is when I told it, I always got with an interview the next day, oh, thank you for applying, but we're not going to continue with it. Well, if I didn't say it, I continued through it, because also studies showed more than 50% of all managers that hire will not hire somebody with neurodivergency. So that is another thing, and that is the thing also why people with autism, with ADHD, with dyslexia, or with other conditions with on the neurodiversity spectrum or other disabilities don't divulge in the start that they have it, because they already have the fear, if they tell it, they're going to be turned down. The next step is with that is also communication. Is, let's say, not everybody with autism, let's say with me, I don't mind talking about it. I don't mind talking with people about it. It does cost me a bit of energy, but that is something that's fine. But everybody is different with autism, ADHD, dyslexia, and like that. That's also something to take in. But if you communicate clearly with the candidate how and what, you can find solutions for it. Yes, I do agree. It's like not every role is ideal for somebody with autism, ADHD, or with dyslexia, because it depends on the role. I'm never going to do a copywriting role because I know it's not going to be a good role for me. No, but you can always have a look in that in a general way how we can do that. That's also one of the things what I do within the awareness and like that, what I do talk about dyslexia within my company. And also I look with other companies, how you can better do this as a leadership team, also with HR, to make that communication work. Because really the point is just sit down with them. I do call it this disability in some way, but I don't see it as a disability so far as myself. I see it more as autism. You have neurotypical and you have neurotypical is the people that normally think like that, and you have neurodiverse and neurodivergent. Sorry, that's something with autism and like that. Sometimes I get a bit confused. With that is I just think in a different way than other people. I communicate in a different way than most people. So as an employer, and you think if I'm an ideal candidate, you need to find a way how to communicate the best way with that. That's a bit in short what I want to say about it, because else I will be talking hours about the subject, because within the training sessions I will go more into depth about it, and also the different kinds of neurodiversity and what the involvement is of that. And happy to answer any questions about it.
Any inputs, anyone? I thought it was quite interesting when Heike said it's quite common for them not to divulge that fact on an application form, which ended up being our experience. It never came out until much later in the recruitment process. And that actually he ended up being made a conditional offer. So that's interesting that they don't want to divulge it.
I think there's a lack of understanding, isn't there, about what it actually means. You know, we use the labels, as it were, are not particularly helpful in the sense that everybody is different. You know, one person with the diagnosis of ADHD could be very, you know, have different you know, different issues to consider than someone else with the same diagnosis. So I think there's definitely a place for education in terms of what it all actually means. What does it mean if you've got this ADHD diagnosis? What does it mean if you're not you know, if you're neurodiverse rather than neurotypical, and if you have dyslexia, what does that actually mean? You know, I mean, it's not dyslexia. Oh, you mean you can't read? It's not really that simple, is it? There's a lack of understanding about it. So I think that, you know, it's an education piece to make sure that when people are going through this recruitment process, that if somebody divulges that they have one of these things or all of them, to consider that they don't immediately get that, oh God, that's too difficult to deal with, let's get that person out of the process, because they just don't know how to deal with it. It's not that they necessarily wouldn't employ that person if they allowed the process to develop in the way that maybe it should do for that particular person. It's just they don't really know how to deal with it, so they just kind of, let's just remove that.
If I can just add an example for it, just like myself with my dyslexia, it's like I can read no problem, I can, writing is okay, I forget some words and like that, so it's not 100% perfect. But for me with my dyslexia, it is more getting the things in my head onto paper that's a difficulty. I can't really explain that how that works, but even with exams and like that, I always struggle. But if you sit down with me and we talk about the subject, I can give you to the minute detail what needs to be done. So one of the concessions you can do with a candidate, let's say like me, is let's say, okay, you know that he struggles or she struggles or they struggle with writing reports. So you can have a look, okay, can we do a meeting? Half an hour, we talk and we get all the information that we want. Is it efficient? Yeah. Or you can have a look, it's like a different solution to it. But that doesn't mean that that person needs to be passed by because just they struggle with that, because there would be another solution for that. And a nice fact is also, most people that are neurodivergent or neurodiverse are 140% more efficient than neurotypical people. Just because we are more focused on the task. And then one of the things is, let's say, communication where it comes down to is you need to be sometimes precise. Another example with you with my autism. If you're going to tell me it's like paint the wall red, normal people will go like, oh yeah, let's go here. If you buy a bucket of red paint and paint the wall red. Me, I go like, okay, which color? Red? There are a couple of colors of red. How many layers you want? What kind of parking tape you're going to use? do I need stairs? Which kind of building I need? Do I need a big one? Do I need a small one? Do I need to use a brush? How do we do this more? So sometimes communicating with also somebody who's neurodiverse is also make sure you have everything lined out and clear instructions on it. And they will do it probably twice as fast as somebody else.
Yeah, it's the knowledge, people understanding what it actually means, I think, is part of the battle, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's all about education, and it's kind of making potential applicants aware that it is okay to disclose what their condition is, to allow future employers to accommodate any kind of special adjustments that any reasonable adjustments that they might need. But it's difficult to open up that conversation if potential candidates do feel worried about, well, if I disclose this, I'm not going to get the job. And like Heike said, he's had instances where you haven't disclosed that you're dyslexic and you've got through to the next stage, but then when you do, you find that you're not getting through to the next stage. So it's finding a way to stop that happening, so that potential employees have the confidence to say, this is what I suffer with, but it's as long as we can come to kind of an agreement as to how I can carry out my role efficiently, to opening up, having that conversation, so that people don't find themselves not being able to get jobs, because the statistics that you mentioned earlier are they're shocking.
Yeah, it shocked me too when you mentioned it.
Yeah,
this definitely entails some sort of discussion. 70% was quite high, I thought. But no, I think, thanks for that, Heike. I think you've definitely given us something to sort of think about and introduce within organizations. Because I have to say, not the forms sometimes that we issue to candidates has a question on, there is a question on, where it says, did you want any sort of specific adjustments, or the employer to be aware prior to your interview, about any specific mental health or medical conditions. And it's a bit of hit or miss, and that's it. It doesn't touch upon any specifics. So yeah, I suppose it's just about fine tweak, sort of tweaking that further.
It's almost like there needs to be, so how some people, employers put on their job ads or whatever they're doing, we are an equal opportunities employer. It's almost like there needs to be something like that for this area. Like, we've been through the training, we know how to deal with this, we are open to it, therefore please tell us, and then we can manage it correctly. So by having the sort of, we are a neurodiverse employer, or, not a neurodiverse employer, that gives the wrong impression, but you know what I mean? Yeah. You'd have to find the right wording, so that people have the confidence to be honest, and therefore, be given the opportunity to join that organisation, rather than just kind of, worry about it, and then it becomes a bit of an issue later on because they get partway through the process, because adjustments haven't been made, they haven't really done very well, or because it hasn't been easy for them as it would have been for someone that's neurotypical. So
tough one, isn't it?
Just to add on that one, you have with my company, what I'm gonna make a badge where people can get, which is a certificate and of the training course, what I can offer. They can put this on their website and say, let's say we have the awareness course about neurodiversity, but it's also a disabled confident employer program within the government. We can add that, but at the end of the day, it is still going to be quite a battle to convince people on about being neurodivergent, because just of the legacy behind it. And yes, I know you're also saying these numbers are quite shocking, and some people think, oh, they should be a bit lower. I find them quite on the low side. I think they're higher. I don't think everybody's telling the truth about it, because from my own experiences, let's say, if you talk about neurodiversity, you don't get the job because it is just a typical idea that people having about autism, ADHD, and like that. Autism, if I talk about it, people think, oh, that's a difficult person. Yes, we can sometimes be rude and bitter and something like that, but that's just a thing that we have. But yeah, I can. I think for a lot of companies, and I'm not promoting only my company, I think any company can do with neurodiversity awareness training for their team, their staff, and like that. Just breaking that vicious circle about stereotyping about what they think is autism, what is ADHD, what is dyslexia, because there's so much more behind it than only what people think. That's also a reason why I mastered for 30 years and I didn't want to accept it, because people think somebody with autism, dyslexia, they stupid and they can't do something and like that. It is still an idea what goes around.
Thanks, Heike. Sonia, did you have any sort of questions for us? We haven't heard from you.
No, I think, I only work with clients with neurodiversity in my sort of psychotherapy practice, and I think so often I think it's the diagnosis that's the issue. So clients experience difficulties, they're not clear what they think it might fit within the realm of, and that there's sort of confidence issues that come out then, I think, in the employment setting that they're in. And that's what tends to come up there. Worked with somebody with ADHD, for example, found it very hard to sit still at a desk all day long, but brimming with ideas and very skilled at what he did. But, to get an assessment is literally years of waiting, or pay for it privately. And so that's just, the issues that I come across. And that causes stress, anxiety, depression, and various other things that come out in the workplace. If that's relevant.
I think it is.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry, no, go, yeah.
Yeah, no, it is quite relevant because I accepted being autism and ADHD because I had depressions over the last 20 years and I had anxiety. I had a lot of issues. I first accepted the mental health issues and then linking them together, and now the world makes more sense. Strangely enough, I'm a much happier person than I was before because I know now where it comes from. It's still hard for people around me to accept what I am. They don't know how to treat me. That's another thing, and that's something that frustrates me sometimes. That's why I set also up this company, just to get more awareness out about that also. But yeah, that's some of the things what I wanted to add also to that. And yeah, I am on the waiting list also, and I've been told it's going to take minimum 2 years before I have a medical diagnosis about my condition. Or else I need to fork out about £1,500 per test just to get it done privately. The thing is for me, it is important to get, I know what I have and I accept what I have, but it is important for me to have that also because then there can be some support with things what I can get access to work or something like that. But don't forget, some people struggle more with it than I do. They can't have that support or they can't find employment just because of the discrimination, what is institutional within this. It is just something that people have imprinted in society about it. And that causes a whole another level. And I think so, yeah, what you're saying is like there's a lot of depression. And one of the facts that I recently read of autism is about 1% of the whole population, but 11% of all suicides are accounted to people with autism. So you can see what is the impact of the way how we need to mask, how we need to act in society because we don't accept it. Yet, hopefully it is improving. What kind of impact it has on your mental health?
Yeah. And I think if you take the view that actually disability is an impairment, and actually if those needs are met, then that person's no longer disabled. And I think that's what it is when, with my work with clients with neurodiversity, it's how do they get their needs met, so that they can live the best life they can and offer, the difference that's valuable, most importantly as well.
Oh, for sure, I agree with that.
Really interesting. Any other questions or points from anyone like to add, or even on not just this specific topic, but if you had to add to the discussion?
I wasn't going to, excuse me, I wasn't going to try and link the to at all. But we've just had the sort of government response to the committee report on menopause in the workplace, and I'm sure everybody's got a view on that. I wondered if that would be a useful topic for the forum, simply to kick some issues around and just see if people had a view on that, because it's quite clear. I was just looking at something that Ela sent through, you know, and the government hasn't accepted the committee's recommendations to produce a sort of a model policy. It hasn't accepted that there should be a consultation on making menopause a protected characteristic, and it seems to me that that's not dissimilar to the question you raised, Sandhya, in your email, which is, you know, do you treat it this way or this way, and nothing in between? It's quite stark, the government's response, and I suspect very possibly out of touch with the way society is approaching the subject, and openness and transparency and inclusiveness and support, and you name it. But I just wondered, you know, we're all together. There's two of us probably in terms of gender, but it's I think it's a wide topic. I think a lot of employers and a lot of employees are talking about this, and it's, you know, good currency for us, perhaps.
Yeah. I mean, the government have been heavily criticised for the response that was issued yesterday. I think the concern with their response is that it might lead some employers to think, oh, well, it's not a protected characteristic, there's no risk for us, so we don't need any additional support in place for employees. But because the government to consult on whether menopause should be a protected characteristic, I think employers still need to be aware that they could still fall foul of the Equality Act in terms of sex and age. The increase in employment tribunal claims that cite menopause, I can't remember the statistic, I looked at it yesterday, but I think it was about about 41% it's increased by, with discrimination claims citing menopause. So I think that's the concern that comes out of it, is actually it might lead employers to think that they don't need to take matters seriously, but actually they do. And equally, like we were saying about people with neurodiversity, it affects people in different ways. Some people might sail through the menopause and not have any symptoms, and they might be absolutely fine, but then you've got other people that suffer really badly. I mean, we've actually been running workshops on how menopause affects women in the workplace, and it's the symptoms that a lot of people don't realize that women do suffer with. It's the kind of anxiety, depression, those kinds of symptoms that come alongside it. So I think there is still kind of a risk for employers if they think that they don't need to take matters seriously. And I also suspect that it's not the last we're going to hear on the menopause and how the law should change to give people more protection. I mean, women are staying in the workplace a lot longer than they used to, so they are affected, and they do go through menopause whilst they're still at work.
I think part of the problem is people making these decisions or passing these verdicts don't have an insight into day-to-day ground realities or the whole spectrum of cases that we tend to see, because like Faye rightly said, in some situations, some people might just sail through it, whereas in others, it shows up in specific cases that are shown up as brain fog. So suddenly you're sitting there performance managing somebody because they're just being, they're overlooking important facts. And conversation, one thing leads to another, and then you unearth what the real problem is. We had another situation where somebody was just being outright rude and abrupt at work, but that was just given the mood swings, which was linking. And this person, what was very obvious and what we sussed out is that this individual was not traditionally behaving in that manner. this is something that have just cropped up in the last 6 months. And then we had to kind of have some conversations to understand what's going on physically for this individual. Had that link not been drawn, you'd be talking about, you know, being abrupt with colleagues, and that could go down another way. So I just think people making these sort of decisions aren't having that insight. They don't have the insight into ground reality. And our advice, that's just my view, I think our advice still needs to be that we take it on a case-by-case basis and understand it for what it is for that individual, what it means for that individual and for their colleagues, and put measures in place. And that's when I find rulings like this, like I've put in the chat window, you know, where you have this whole black or white situation, really lands us in a pickle. Because if okay, we work in the sector, so we understand that it's not as black and white. But I think for employers who don't engage necessarily with these sort of forums, they don't have that insight. And that's where errors can happen. And that enhances their risk levels as well as employers, I think, which is a danger with these sort of rulings, I find. That's just what I feel. Genevieve, you're on mute. Genevieve, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, I just have one point to make, which is that I haven't actually, I haven't read the details of the report, and I don't know all the details of the way the government wants to approach this. But my concern, I am not yet at the stage of having the menopause myself, but it is in the future and not that far away. I certainly don't want to have go to work and have people think they can be very open and discuss it. So it's the matter of how you engage people. It's all right to be aware about it, but you know, one can be too transparent and too honest and too open about a subject which many people are going to find either isn't really that bad and just something you have to get through, or something that's really nobody else's business. I don't, you know, that sounds a bit blunt, but actually it's just a personal matter. And so I don't know, you know, I'm saying it's a bit grey, this area, about how to handle it, I think.
I think that's right. So not saying it could possibly be wrong. It is absolutely a personal matter. And what you have is I'm sure we would all champion the right for affected employees to be supported and to have a supportive environment, and that involves training and you know all the things we're talking about in this wider spectrum. But of course, menopause of itself can present in a myriad symptoms, from very opaque to life-changing, and it's incredibly difficult, I think, at one end of that extreme to manage. You know, I mean, if you've got somebody who's, I don't know, a professor and they have brain fog, if you think from conventional wisdom how you would approach adjustments, adaptations, what support you can give somebody who is, you know, punching at this level and suddenly not able to perform and deliver, it's quite challenging from an employer's perspective, and it's quite challenging even from an employee's perspective to say reasonably what you should be seeking, what you should be pushing for. I mean, it throws up hugely complex issues. And I'm not talking about an employer who doesn't want to engage or doesn't want to support or doesn't perceive the problem, but it's the timescale you may be dealing with. I mean, as I understand it, menopause, you know, is a date. What we're really talking about is a bit like money laundering became anti-money laundering. You know, in due course, we might be talking about sort of after menopause. Sorry, it's going off on a bit, but you're talking about symptoms that are triggered, but then have possibly lasting effect, and that sort of individually or cumulatively can have you know, quite profound and very destructive consequences, and definitely one size probably does not fit all, although symptoms will inform, you know, but it's a very difficult area.
I've just got a question actually from what Genevieve just touched upon, and actually Heike touched upon it earlier a little bit. You know, and recently again, this came up in my work. What do you do when the employer wants to be supportive? One, because they feel that in the situation that is the right thing to do. But two, it's also the ethical side of doing the right thing, you know, as an employer. And what do you do when the employer has that approach and the employee says, not giving you any consent for any occupational health referrals, not interested, I take responsibility for my own health, it really is none of your business. Where does that leave? What, you know, and say, for example, and this was a case where this employee had a health issue, passed out at a social event, not because of too much alcohol, just because of just poor eating habits that were historical, and wouldn't engage and would insist on driving into work when we couldn't get an occupational health, you know, a report. What was the blood? Just all we knew was there was a blood pressure issue there. And this was the second time this was happening. What do you do when an employee refuses to give you information, nothing, and you just wants to carry on working as normal? What would be your advice?
I can't give you the answer. Sorry, I can't give you the answer because I think it depends also on exactly what the person's like, what they're about, the job they do, how much it affects things. But I think that just in addition to that, I think that you don't want to be in a situation where you're always assuming that women around the age of 50, that they're all, everything they're up to, everything they talk about, and whatever problems or issues or they're about, it's all because of the menopause. That is also quite unfair, on borderline of discrimination, and that's what concerns me about being very open about things, that, you know, people can always just sort of be almost okay to make jokes about women in that age. Oh, well, you know she's menopausal. That's the explanation for everything here, rather than seeing the person is just a normal person going through the same things that all people go through at 50. I mean, I don't know enough about it, but these are things I can see that this is difficult to handle.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't think there's a perfect answer for every situation.
No, and everyone's different, and how everybody wants to approach it will be different. I mean, when you say about kind of having concerns about people sort of mocking people and sort of saying, oh, well, it's because she's menopausal. I mean, that kind of borderlines, that's harassment. So there are still protections in place. And Sandhya, what you were saying about the individual not wanting to go to occupational health, my first question was going to be, was there a clause in their contract that said that they consented to be seen by a medical practitioner? Yeah,
that's all there. It's there, but I think ultimately it boils down to consent, isn't it? Because even occupational health is never going to pick up the phone to have an assessment with them. Even if that's in the clause in the contract, where and this individual signed the consent form, but when they went to the appointment, it's actually, I don't want to be part of this. I want to do it. And that there ended the referral. So, and then the employer is really, and this is of course in a different context, it's not menopause, it's not ADHD. However, my point is this can surface in these contexts where you're talking about something being protected under the Equality Act. And this employer, going back to my example, is left high and dry thinking, how do I do the right thing? What if this individual passes out again? I've got nothing that I can show that I've done, just apart from asking for an occupational health report. I don't want it on my conscience for this person to pass out at work and kick the bucket at work, because that has happened with another competition, that has happened literally. So this is a high stress environment job. So yeah, this employer is basically left with nothing to be able to help and prevent something like that occurring at their workplace. It's very hard.
The other thing I was going to say, just briefly, yes, this very much focuses on women because it's the menopause, but I mean, there is generally within, a lot of scientific circles, men have something similar, not physical, of course, but they have something, they go
midlife crisis.
But I wasn't going to put it like that, but they go through, a phase of life where there is a change for them also, but it's not physical. So I'm saying legislation isn't addressing that, or maybe they don't think it exists.
I think the you know, on the point of privacy, the right to privacy, that exists absolutely, and I think that everybody's experience of you know, in this case the menopause is their own experience, and they don't have to share that with anyone. But if it does start manifesting itself in particular ways that affect their work, then it is something that needs to be addressed, and the conversation needs to be had, but the assumptions shouldn't be made. It's all about, you know, I've noticed that you have been, you know, acting a bit differently recently, and you have been shouting at Maureen in finance, and that's not really acceptable. And so I just wondered, it's not like you know, is there something that we can, is there something going on that you need to, you know, share, and is there anything we can do to help, blah, 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 and have the conversation. So it's not about saying, oh, you've been shouting at Maureen in finance, is it because of the menopause, because you've got this policy about, you know, supporting people in menopause. It's about, you know, people sharing what they're comfortable sharing, and then employers acting on that information accordingly as and when possible. So I, you know, I don't, the difficulty, I suppose, in situations is, but if you're a woman, obviously, and you are experiencing this, and you have a male manager, I mean, personally, I probably wouldn't want to talk to them about it. You know, if they said I've been shouting at Maureen, I wouldn't want to say, oh yeah, no, it's because of the menopause. You know, I found that I've been, you know, mood swings, blah, blah, blah. Because it's not in society, not got to the point yet where that is, you know, people don't talk about it all the time with all and sundry, you know, male or female. It's very sort of, you know, it is still a little bit difficult to have those open conversations. If I had a female boss, then I probably wouldn't feel that way. So, but that's me. Other people are probably different. So I think you have to give people the opportunity to have the conversation and talk about it should they wish to. You know, make it clear that it's not okay to shout, and you know, and the answer is whatever is appropriate, you know, for that particular individual, whether it's talking about it or just that person realizing that they need to just take a minute to think about how they're behaving at work. And to the point, Sandhya, of your person who is refusing to engage, I think they are putting the employer in an impossible position. But the employer can only make decisions about what is the right thing to do with that person based on the information that they have, and I think there is some sort of obligation to also take into account things that they have a firm belief are the case, rather than having sort of any sort of medical evidence, and make decisions accordingly, whether it's giving people a bit of leeway here and there because they believe that they have low blood pressure or whatever it is. But they can't do anything more than that. If that person is refusing to engage, then there's no real way for them to do anything other than that, really, is there?
Yeah. Nothing that I could think of, sadly.
No.
This is why it's quite relevant that this discussion came up now, and I just thought I'd put the question there.
Unless they, you know, and I guess if they are a danger to themselves, so if they're getting in a car and they've had repeated episodes of passing out, there's a bit of a health and safety issue there, isn't
Absolutely.
there? So is there
Absolutely.
an opportunity to send someone home on the grounds of ill health on that basis?
Do it. We tried telling this individual, work from home at least until we have a clean sheet from your GP, even if you don't want to engage with occupational health. Next morning, rocks up at work. And again, this is somebody who is a bit of a workaholic, which adds to the problem. So it just feels like a no-win situation for the employer.
I don't know if medical suspension, something a bit more solid, would kind of be helpful in that situation. I don't know, from a legal perspective, Chris or Faye, you might want to tell me if I'm talking nonsense.
Yeah, I can see the point. I mean, the health and safety angle is very difficult because the obligation is still on the employer to take reasonably necessary and prudent steps. And if you think somebody is a danger to themselves, what's the difference between somebody refusing to wear a helmet or a high-vis jacket doing construction work? You know, sometimes you have to be the parent in the relationship and say, no, you're going to do this. It's a requirement for you to perform that task. And if you won't, you're not doing it, full stop. And if you have the ability to suspend somebody in terms of they're not attending work, but able nonetheless to perform work from home, that might be a sensible step. If you're able to say, because we have genuine legitimate concerns about your health, and you know, including how you come to work and return, and we require a full diagnosis and prognosis, if you like. But
just to jump in there, Chris. So are you saying you almost medically suspend? You are medically suspending them?
I'm just
you
saying
don't have an occupational health report.
No, I'm just saying it's an option, isn't it? It's something you could canvass, because, for example, what would be the difference with somebody who oh crikey, I can't think of the situation. What is it when you sometimes have seizures and
Epilepsy?
epilepsy, sorry. So suddenly I could see it, but I couldn't reach for it. That's right. Thank you so much. Yeah, you know, there you might have a situation where prescribed drugs could control that. But sometimes that isn't the situation, and periodically somebody will have an attack and go through an episode, and you need first aiders to be able to deal with that. You wouldn't necessarily exclude that person from the work environment. So all I'm saying is you might just need to look at everything in the round and consider what the options are and what's viable. But you don't necessarily have to do it collaboratively with the employee. If the employee is refusing to cooperate, I think sometimes the employer has to make a decision which overall is in their best interests.
Yeah. And I mean, if you're instructing an employee to work from home because of concerns that you have about their health and well-being, and you're asking them to work from home because as their employer, you have an obligation to provide them with a healthy and safe working environment. I mean, if they're refusing to follow those instructions and they just keep turning up to work, then they're failing to follow reasonable instructions from the employer, because those instructions to remain at home to ensure your health and safety, they're not unreasonable. They're reasonable instructions of the employer. They're putting the employer in an impossible situation.
Yeah, and that was discussed. I think the challenge you've got for the smaller size business is where you've got this individual who's got so much experience, such good relationship with your client. It's such a paradox, because you've got that, and then you've got this problem where this individual will just not follow a reasonable management instruction. And are you going to be disciplining them for gross misconduct? It's just so difficult. And we did have that discussion actually, and my client just said, absolutely not, I couldn't do it. Here I am trying to protect this individual from being overworked and kicking the bucket at the workplace. Why would I want to go down this disciplinary route? So this is where, again, the law is so, you can't apply the blunt knife of the law, I find, in these sort of situations. It just feels there's got to be something else. But medical suspension is an interesting point. And the only reason I think I was shying away from that is because, again, it feels punitive on record, no matter what we say, that it's not punitive and all of that. But yes, it feels punitive, it goes on the record. But two, I'm not clear, and I'm not sure if you can actually medically suspend somebody until, just because we need further sort of professional advice from an occupational health therapist, until which time we don't deem it safe for this individual to be driving into work, to be going on client meetings. Would medical suspension be fundamentally, bluntly put, is it okay to medically suspend someone just because they won't give their consent for an occupational health referral? And yes, it's there in the contract laws. Is that a route that would be deemed to be fair just because somebody refused to give consent for a referral.
Can I flip it around the other way? And I'm not, I mean, this is fact sensitive and, you know, all the usual stuff. But if you look at it from the other, if you look at the prism is from the opposite perspective, why would you not? You have a contractual right. The individual is obligated to act and abide by reasonable instructions. There's a legitimate reason to give the instruction because the overarching obligation is to protect their health and safety, and you have a legitimate concern because you know you're forewarned. So as an employer, you're on notice in exactly the same way. If somebody couldn't cope with their workload or the stress, you know, you actually are squarely on notice. And if they have a, you can bet if they have a problem and there's a horrible incident, some sort of accident, you'd be on the line for personal injury, wouldn't you? And would your insurers not be looking at you and saying, well, why did you not act? What would have been a proportionate and objectively justifiable and reasonable thing to have done? We say, what we want to do is get the medical report, because without the medical report, we're hampered. And she's obligated to cooperate. It's, you know, that they are obligated to cooperate. How do we position that? And I'm just, you know, if you look at it in with that prism in mind, you're very much more going to be very much more forceful in the way you approach it than if you look at it in a very sort of more liberal or laissez-faire situation where you're being very keen to balance what are competing interests. I'm just sort of putting it in a different sort of way.
I think the key here is if this person was an underperforming employee who the employer wasn't that fussed about hanging on to, they'd do that.
Straightforward.
Because
Absolutely,
they wouldn't care about annoying this person as much. Yeah. But because this person is key to their business, that is influencing the decision-making processes that they're undertaking, and whether that's right or wrong is a different discussion.
An extremely loyal worker, way too loyal. Actually, like I said, almost like a bordering on workaholism.
Is there a middle ground that would prevent? So that's like, okay, you appreciate that you want to come to work because you're very dedicated, and we absolutely value that in you. However, are there things that could be put in place to make sure that when you are traveling to and attending work, that you are as safe as you can be? So, you know, car sharing, so they're not, you know, if the concern is that they're going to pass out at any given moment or have some sort of, I don't know, a heart attack or something because of all the stress, or a stroke or something like that, what could be done in the parameters within which they're allowing you to do it to protect that person on their own terms, I suppose. But, you know, how would that stand up in a personal injury court or a tribunal court?
You're dealing with an individual who's quite sort of very set in their ways, you know, very proud of what they do and why they do it, and will not, you know, figuratively want to hold on to any crutches at all. But I think I'm tempted to lean back on Chris's sort of idea of, yes, where would this go and how would you explain it if there was a personal injury claim? And working backwards from there to find a solution. Because yes, we've also been criticized of, oh, all this red tape is in, you know, just all you want to do is just tick boxes. And my client is going, no, what I don't want, and put it as bluntly as that, what I don't want is for you to pass out at your desk or for something worse to happen at your desk. That's not what we stand here for. So I think, yeah, that's a conversation that has to be picked up from that, starting with personal injury and working backwards. Really interesting.
It's just absolutely typical archetypal situation where you've got somebody who's key to the workforce and the productivity and the service delivery end, who's a long-standing and loyal employee, motivated by all the right reasons, the very last thing you want to do is figuratively smack them. You know, of
Exactly.
course, you want to be engaging, and you want to be supporting, and you want to be, I just wonder if behind the scenes there's a reason the person doesn't want to have the report, because, for example, it might stop them
True.
driving, or it might stop them
Yes,
performing part of
and
that
this is
role.
what my clients suspect. This is a suspicion. I think that it goes again back to where we started this meeting. Is there something you don't want to reveal because you're too scared as to where that's going to land you?
Or it's a lack of acceptance of a problem on a personal level. They don't want to accept that anything's different. They would just carry on as normal and everything will be fine. Because they haven't accepted that issue.
And on it goes.
But sometimes,
Yeah. Just seeing the time, it's 11:32. It's been such an interesting conversation this morning. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I did. Heike, thank you so very much. Yes,
Can I
Heike,
say
go
one more
ahead.
thing? I am offering a free neurodiversity awareness session on the 6th of February. It's on the Seven Oaks website, and for members it is free of charge. So if you're interested, it's just general information about neurodiversity, and it's just somewhere to start the ball rolling, a bit more understanding about it also. I can put a link in the chat, or else
Actually, Heike, why don't you send the link to Catherine? If you could please send it to Catherine, and she'll
Yeah.
share it with all our members.
she has it already. It's on the Seven Oaks website.
Perfect. All right,
Yeah.
fine. Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Thank you.
Can I
So,
interrupt?
yeah, but
Sorry,
pop
my
it up
name-
there as well.
My name's
Sorry.
Elaine. Can you hear me? Can
Yes,
anyone
we
hear me?
can, Elaine. Hi.
Yeah.
Oh, that's
Yes.
good. Hi, I'm from Rixon K, and I'm really sorry to join late. Two apologies. One, to join late. It's just something really urgent came up, and I had been intended to link up at 10:30. I'm sorry to miss out on your presentation, Heike. That would have been really interesting because I'm really interested in that area. And then two, sorry not to be able to contribute towards the talk. And three, actually, not to have had an ability to put something in the chat because the chat wasn't working. And then lastly, my camera isn't working. But anyway, I've enjoyed seeing all of you today. I wish I could have had an input into Sandy's discussion, because I would have had some suggestions on that and to do with the framing of occupational health. But anyway, nice to see everybody, and I will endeavour to come at the right time, as I did also this morning. And sorry, but I'll have my camera working next time. Lovely to see you.
Very
all.
well to join us today, but thank you. No, that's
Take care.
perfectly fine.
Thank
I'm
you.
sorry the chat wasn't working.
Thanks for
No
organising
problem.
it. Yeah.
That's all right. Take care.
Thank you.
All
All
right.
right. Bye.
On that, Christina,
okay, bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everyone.
Good to see you all.
Bye.
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 Bye. Bye.